I'm Gabriel Frey, Passamaquoddy basket maker from Zibayig and Medaknaguk. I grew up in both communities. I learned how to make baskets from my grandfather when I was around 18. And he was primarily a utility basket maker, sort of like these pack baskets. I did that solely utility baskets for quite a few years, and eventually started refining the process of the utility basket, trying to echo the aesthetics of the fancy baskets within a sort of like usable piece of art. Eventually made the same pack basket, but 1/8 its original size. And then from that process started adding leather work and things. So most of the purses that I make now have a leather lid on them and a leather liner. And eventually, so I, for a long time, only went with natural materials, no color. Eventually started incorporating natural dyes to create sort of a different look as well. They're all designed still to be utility baskets, so everything about them, the function is first. It has the runners on the bottom just like the larger baskets. While there is a sort of like luxury feel to having the leather liner, it is still part of the utility. It sort of strengthens everything about the basket. But yeah, so that's what I'm doing now. The style has slowly changed over time, but still primarily utility. So this is black ash, Fractionus nigra, and I am beating the tree to separate the growth rings. So this is a ring porous tree, so you basically have to pound every single square inch of the tree, and it fractures the cadmium layer between the growth rings. And this is all to get the raw material to start making baskets. It's an incredibly labor-intensive process. And so this is just the beginning process of gathering the raw material. So for the purposes of the video, I'm only going to be pounding a strip and enough to process to then incorporate into a basket. But normally I would be pounding the entire log and then starting to remove material. This is just to make it a little faster. So after you've done an entire strip, you can then begin to remove the growth rings, and they generally will separate off the tree the width of the axe head that was used to pound them. And if there are any pin knots or disruptions in the fiber, that will come through along with the fibers that you're removing. So it kind of almost makes the fiber stick a little bit. And that is the raw material. Next, I'm going to be shaving off these loose fibers and then splitting it down and then gauging it to get basket weaving material. So this is the material that I just got off the tree outside. And after we've harvested the tree, and then processed it, this is just the raw splints, so literally 1 year's growth. And there are a lot of different things that make a tree a basket quality tree. This particular tree has fairly thin growth rings in terms of what I would most often use. I generally prefer it a little bit on the thicker side, but it is still good material and can split relatively easily. So right now, I'm just cleaning up the edges. And then the shaving process literally just planes off the fibers that were pounded that were fractured in the pounding process. So that's the fast growth of the tree. And black ash is a ring porous tree, so it's basically delineated into fast and slow growth. And that's any ring porous tree, but black ash is unique in that delineation is so stark that those fast growth fibers is what allows the tree to be separated in the way it is. It's actually like this fiber that has such amount of space in it that you can actually just pound the tree and then remove it. And then the other material, the slow growth, is so dense that you have this extremely durable material from that. And this tool is called a bedutamud. It's a standard A-frame. That this basically just serves to hold the ash in place, and then just by cutting into very, very slightly that 1 year's growth ring, you can actually peel that in half. And while the tree separates along the growth ring, when you're pounding it, there's no fibrous delineation for splitting. So the only thing that makes this split evenly or not is the amount of pressure that you put on it. And there's a couple of knots there that kind of took the fiber a little bit. So any fine basket, any fancy basket, this process has to be done to get that fancy basket material. So this is what's called a double split. So both sides of this are from the inside of that growth ring. And it's still an incredibly strong material even after you've done that. The next step in the process, and this is all speeded up quite a lot. Generally we'd be doing the entire tree all at once. So like all the pounding, all the splitting, all the shaving. So that there's not like steps in the process that are skipped. So then once you have all of your split material, the gauge is basically a tool that has blades set a specific width apart. This is a 3/16 gauge. And so you get a standard uniform weaver. Now this gauge is cutting, but first and foremost what it's doing is it's guiding along the fibers this way. Every step in the process in basket making is designed to utilize the strength of the tree that's inherently there in the fibers. So when we pound the tree, we're taking it off the tree in the way that it grew. When you split it, you're going along those natural fibers. Even though it's not a sharp delineation, you're still splitting along the fibers to keep the strength as long as you can. And then the same thing with the gauging. Because this process has been done this way, these little strips that you end up getting are incredibly strong and durable. And that is the beginning of basket making. Usually the easiest part is actually weaving the basket. This is a particularly unique basket because, well, it's all the natural dyes, but there are a lot more sort of cool tones in this basket. Generally, there's like a wide range, but most of these have been soaked in a iron mordant first, which in dyeing terms, they say it saddens the color. It basically just turns it into a cool tone. So even these like reds and maroons become sort of like sort of turned down a little bit. They're not as bright and vibrant. And that was just to sort of get a much more sort of like subdued tone throughout. So there's iron with logwood, and then actual just logwood with a alum acetate, madder root with iron, and then madder root going up through just with an aluminum, and then it gets into, it's either Osage or weld, and then over dyeing the Osage with a indigo creates that green into the sort of like aqua blue colors. Yeah, it's been a process trying to figure out a way of blending the colors and like sort of creating a more smooth transition. So a lot of it has to do with like over dyeing or combining colors to sort of like create a more subtle transition between them. This one is just indigo and then with the madder root standards. So it creates that stark transition between the colors, complementary colors. But for the most part, for a long time, I didn't use any dyes because of that sort of like trying to make the material as pure as possible. Once I discovered how vibrant natural dyes can be on ash, it's really fun to sort of explore and try new things with it. The process of basket making really begins by tree selection. And I guess even backing up even further, it would be like site selection. So black ash is a wetland species, but that's not to say any ash that grows in a wetland is good, right? So there has to be the sort of like healthy quality. So like if you find ash in a bog, it's generally, there's not enough oxygen in the water, the nutrients is sort of like really low. So you get that same growth, but each year is really, really thin. So the materials will be really, really thin. So that transition, it's not producing as much. So in a healthy stand, you then look for the straightest tree. And then it has to be something that you can actually carry out on your back. So once you've selected your tree and you have it and you're able to transport it to where you're going to process it, the pounding process is generally you have to get every single square inch of the tree with a direct strike of the axe. So each strike has to overlap each strike both vertically and horizontally. If you miss a spot, then those fibers that you're trying to break will remain fused, and those fibers will tear right into the previous year's growth. So the actual pounding process is incredibly important, that it's uniform all the way across. And then once you have that single growth ring, shaving and splitting is basically like you want to do all of that at the same time, so that, like, because as soon as you process a tree, it starts to discolor. Like you can see right there where that strike was, there's a little bit of discoloration on that side. And that's because this had been sitting out for, I think, a week previous. If you just pounded it right as soon as you harvested it, it'll remain nice, clean, white material. And that takes dye better. It makes a brighter basket when you weave with it. It's really like the prize material for most basket makers, especially basket makers that are working with dyes and trying to color the ash. And then most gauges that people have are either family heirlooms that have been passed down, or it's something that you make yourself. You can't go out and buy these tools. So most of the time, they are incredibly ornate and works of art in and of themselves. And that just speaks to the sort of all of the art that goes into all of the process of basket making. Usually when people see this process for the first time, there's this like surprise of like, isn't there an easier way to do that? And I mean, there are lots of easier ways, but all of them detract in some way from the inherent strength that we're putting into these pieces, because doing all of the steps by hand creates that strength within the material. So being able to see as you're splitting it, as you're pounding it, like if you've missed a spot, it really sort of informs how each basket comes together. The first time I actually processed a tree out in the woods where I dropped it was a really incredible thing to sort of like watch the material go from a standing tree in the forest to a basket right there. So you're taking the cellular structure of the tree and then disintegrating all the constituent components and then putting it back together with the same inherent strength that the tree has, but just rearranged. It's pretty incredible. You know, Wabanaki basket making goes back to pre-European contact. And you know, like you can see it in sort of like the shape of the pack basket. Before European contact, our rivers were those were our roads. So every family had a canoe, and this design is basically designed to fit on your back, but then also to fit into the hull of a canoe and actually be stowed away a little bit. So it keeps it out of the way. And that design is sort of echoed within our modern pieces as well. As the European trade sort of like started getting more connected with our culture, that shape became ubiquitous with like the Great North Woods and hunting and trapping and all of this stuff. But people don't realize that it actually dates back to pre-European Americas. And then a lot of our industries became sort of like basket making became a way of making a living. So in the coastal fisheries, you see this a lot, the scale basket. And this was used by different fisheries. You can see they would paint the initial of whatever fishery you were working for, because they were so common. Like there were thousands and thousands and thousands of these things being churned out. And that's on the coast. And then up north, this is a little smaller one, but the potato basket was ubiquitous with farming up there. And so you see that like these things that are just sort of like quintessentially Maine actually are a signature of the Wabanaki culture and how integrated we have been and continue to be within the dominant culture. And then even today, our fancy baskets are still winning awards all over the country. So it's pretty incredible that it all stems from this one incredibly unique species of tree.